Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens, and this is Carly Stevens Books for all things writing, publishing, and indie author life. Today, we're going to talk about navigating the muddy middle of your story. All right, let's just get straight into it. It's easy to get excited about the beginning of your story. It's shiny, it's exciting, and then depending on who you are, especially if this is your first project, 30, 50 pages in, it's easy to lose motivation, lose tension in your story. And how do you actually get through that middle, being motivated yourself and having the story not sag or lag in that middle part? If you're watching this, you're probably in the process of writing a novel, maybe thinking about it, maybe you lack that motivation to keep going. Spoiler alert for the rest of this presentation, you are not alone. This is like a rite of passage. This happens to everybody, and often what separates those who actually finish and eventually publish their work and those who just want to write a book kind of vaguely is that change in mindset and developing the tools to continue through and past that muddy middle when things start to get more difficult. The muddy middle is that middle portion of your novel. It's not the exciting beginning, it's not the exciting ending, it's everything in between. Really, it's the meat of your story. If you think about it that way, that's where most of the exciting stuff actually happens. I'm going to give you some practical tips as well as some mindset tips in this video to help you make the most of that middle part, both story-wise and for yourself. It's easy to not know where you're going exactly with your story, but there are lots of ways that you can troubleshoot this. So the question is, now that you're here, now that you are kind of stuck in that muddy middle, like I would get stuck in the mud in Oregon Trail too, between when I left and getting to Oregon. You're fording rivers, you're doing all these things, your party is getting bitten by snakes. I would, for whatever reason, I feel like it was a glitch in the game, always get stuck in the mud and not make it to Oregon. So how can you avoid that happening to you? As I mentioned, you are not alone at all. There are ways to push through that aren't just muscling your way forward, but actually you're making the most of it. You're not a failure for feeling this way. Everybody gets kind of disheartened at some point as a writer in the middle. So here are some quotes by famous writers, Thomas Mann, Sidney Sheldon, and Gustave Flaubert, who talk about how difficult it is to be a writer. Now, there are some people for whom writing is just difficult and yet they're going to tortured artist their way through. This is not quite what I'm talking about. I think that you can be joyful through the majority of your writing process, but if you're feeling unmotivated or like this part is hard when it should be fun, that's everybody. So let's start with some mindset stuff, because really that is what's going to kick things into gear even more, I would argue, than a lot of the more practical tips, which I'll give you in a second. So the first thing I want you to consider is whether your creative well is full. This is a common phrase among, writing YouTubers and podcasters, etc. It's the idea that you have a certain amount of creativity, and once you use up a bunch of it, then you need to often take some time, fill up that creative well in a variety of different ways that work for you, and then you are ready to go off to the races again. It is a rare person that is just constantly feeling this overflow of eloquent creativity all the time. I myself go through phases of being very productive and creative, and then not so much. So for example, in December 2024, and then the first 2 months of this year, January and February, in those 3 months, I wrote about 100,000 words. I was very productive. I was feeling incredibly creative and wrote all the time. In March and now April, I have written hardly at all. I've been focusing much more on marketing efforts and book events and book launches and things like that. I'm not worried about this because I know that I will return to that frenzy of writing and creativity, just because I've been at this long enough to kind of begin to understand my own rhythms. But yeah, consider, is your own creative well full? Some ways to fill that back up are to read both in and out of your own genre. I know a good friend of mine, C.H. Lynn, who's another multi-genre indie author and just an all-around wonderful person. Check out her stuff if you haven't. She's written fairy tale retellings with a twist. She's written post-apocalyptic, sci-fi fantasy. She's really done a lot of different stuff. But anyway, C.H. Lynn does not read books in whatever genre she's currently writing. She feels like she will subconsciously take some of those ideas and put them into her own story, and she doesn't want to be sort of quote unquote contaminated like that. So once she's finished with a project, then she'll dive right back into those genres as a reader, but she kind of has to separate those out. Now, I know that other people are the opposite. Maybe they are thriller writers and all they read are thrillers, and so it's just thrillers as a creator, thrillers as a consumer. It doesn't really matter. I love reading in a variety of different genres. I am like the ultimate mood reader, and I feel like for me that is a great way to go, because I'll pick up pacing tips from thrillers, I'll pick up tension from romances, I'll pick up description from literary, and I'll be able to kind of mix all that together in a bubbling brew that will hopefully turn into a better story for myself. So however you read, if you listen to audiobooks, if you read the same genre as you write, etc., read a little bit and get words back in your system, good phrasing, characters, and plots that maybe you couldn't have come up with yourself. Also, look after your health. This is something that it is easy to overlook, especially as an indie author, when you're just grinding away, trying to make sure that you can make a living. Your health is more important than just about anything. If you're making a lot of money, great, fantastic, but you can't enjoy it if you are unwell. So this is not only physical health, sitting and hunching and typing all day, but this is also mental health. For me, I've needed to take breaks from certain projects or at different times because of my mental health and knowing the negative toll that certain styles of writing, really dark topics, that kind of thing, would take on me. And so I take a bit of a step back from those things. So yeah, look after your health if you need to. Go to therapy. There's no shame in that. In fact, it's a great idea for just about everybody to get in a better headspace. Something else you can do to get yourself in the right mindset for getting through that muddy middle is brainstorming again. Give yourself permission to not start at square one. I mean, you've already written a few chapters, I assume, you've gotten into your story, but return to that well of joy. What got you excited about this story in the first place? So brainstorm in a way that is pressure free. All of your ideas don't need to be good. Some of them can be silly. Some of them can be just wild what ifs. You might want to return to an id list. I have a video about id lists if you want to know more about those, but basically it is the idea that you have a list of just big and small things that you enjoy as a reader. What makes you smile? What makes a book an auto buy? These can be things as big as tropes. I enjoy a fake dating sometimes, or they can be as small as tiny details. Maybe you like it when it snows. I love it when there are long coats. I love all long coats. I love lanterns. If there is a lantern of any kind, it just improves the scene for me. So if you go back to that id list, that source of excitement and inspiration, it's not like everything's going to fit into your current work in progress, but maybe there is some small detail that you can put into the next scene that will make you excited about that. Or in your brainstorming, maybe you'll come up with a what if scenario that turns things in a different direction than you had originally thought, that you're more excited about. And then finally, on this slide anyway, is journal about what will happen. This is a great pressure-free, stress-free way to make some progress on your story without actually committing to the wording of a scene or a chapter. So if you journal about what will happen, then that will set you up for maybe your next writing session, or it'll show you where you've gone wrong because all of a sudden you just don't really know where to go from here. If you're just journaling about what's going to happen next, it's much easier to backtrack and try a different direction rather than after you've already committed to writing a few chapters in that direction. I know, at least for me, I am less inclined to get rid of those chapters and start from over here and go in a different direction that might be better for the story. So yeah, journal about what will happen. A few other ways to keep your well of creativity full in general and for your story in particular is to follow your character's curiosity. This is definitely what I did for my debut novel, which I started writing when I was 17 years old. I was a discovery writer through and through in high school, and of course before that. I have since become a little bit more of a hybrid. I use plot structure, a little bit more on that later. But what I would do to get to know my characters is just follow them. If they wanted to go to a place or talk to somebody, then I would follow them there. So it's a great writing exercise to see what your characters are interested in, who they are as people, what could happen next in the story. There's a lot you can get out of just that exercise of following your characters, even if you don't end up using that particular scene in the story. Also, next, determine what needs to happen to freshen up the story. Maybe it feels stale, maybe it feels flat and sloggy, and maybe something as simple as a new character with an interesting related subplot is all you need to freshen up that story. So if you are somebody who struggles with subplots, personally I struggle with the term subplot. I prefer plot complications, just because subplot makes it sound like you could pluck it out and, just by itself. And I feel like any sort of subplot should be just an integral part of the whole story. I have a video about 4 different kinds of subplots or plot complications that you could throw into the mix to add some layers to your story, add some interest in a way that is not just getting to whatever imagined word count you feel you need, but also is meaningful and interesting for your story. And then something else that can start to fill up that well is to try something new, like a new medium. So like creating a playlist. I suggested creating a playlist for their stories the last time I taught creative writing at the high school level, and everybody had already done it just on their own. They already had Spotify playlists with the feeling of their story in it, which is fantastic. I've done that for most of my writing projects as well, and it can be a great way to just revive interest in the genre, in the feeling, in the action, whatever it is of your story. If you already have a playlist, or maybe you are less musical, which is not most of us, but every once in a while you meet somebody, go visual. Instead, go on Pinterest. I know it's not the most popular platform anymore, but it is a great place to create those boards of visuals with maybe the types of characters you have in your story, or the setting, or different objects. This was really helpful for me as I was writing Laertes in particular, my dark academia Hamlet retelling set in 1920s Paris, because there were actual places in this where some of them I'd gone to myself and others I hadn't. I'd never been inside the Paris Opera House, and that is an important setting here in this book. So I looked up pictures so I could accurately describe what was going on. So yeah, go outside the medium of words and try something else to get you inspired for your story. An important mindset element that I see pretty often with writers, especially when they're new, they're writing their first book, is having artificial expectations that ultimately cramp their creativity. So what do I mean by that? First of all, your story might be great in its first draft. It happens occasionally, but it's not going to be perfect. It's going to need revision. It's going to need editing, no matter what. So I've known people who have barely made any progress at all because of how much of a perfectionist they are, and they just don't want to be wrong, and they keep rewriting and rewriting the first couple pages and don't really get anywhere. And it's kind of heartbreaking because that, having no story at all is a shame when you have the ability, but you have these expectations on yourself that are doing more harm than good. So just expect to work on that story again, especially if you're writing your first story, your first book. Embrace the idea of editing and try your best to avoid comparing your first draft to other people's final draft, which is inevitably not the first one for them either. There also is another artificial expectation that some people have. I see this a little less frequently, but just so you know, there is no guarantee of traditional publishing, that your stuff's going to be picked up by a traditional publisher, especially within a certain time limit. So if you're thinking to yourself, maybe you're a very confident person, maybe you're kind of on the opposite end and you're like, oh yeah, now I'm going to bang this out and then I'm going to get a contract and then I'll become a full-time writer by the time I'm 30. Maybe it's not out of the question, but it's extremely unlikely. I'm just gonna be frank. Traditional publishing is a business. It is not about who the best writers are. It's about who the most marketable writers are. So those are the people who have the biggest social platforms. Those are the people who are matching the current or near future trends that are happening. That is a lot of factors that are often not in your control. Now, if you want to be traditionally published, then I say go for it. Definitely get that agent, shop around. It is a possibility, but especially if you're looking at a particular timeline for that to happen, that's just not very realistic. You can do everything you can to improve your chances of that, but I think it's more harmful than beneficial in terms of a mindset to expect to get picked up by a traditional publisher, especially when you think it's going to be right away. A way around this is to be an indie author. I'm not saying that you should put out your first draft. In fact, I'm saying don't do that. Make sure that it is something worthy of being on the shelf, worthy of being picked up by, your favorite traditional publisher. But once you have a book that you are proud to put out into the world, that's well edited and all of that, then you don't have to go through traditional publishing anymore. You can release that. But even having a timeline on that first book that you're writing is, just be careful with that. I decided on the release date for my debut novel, Fearing and Rising, after I had a draft and I had gotten most of the way through the editing process. So I knew it was good. It was ready. It was, I knew that I could deliver it within that year or whatever it was. So yeah, give yourself that space to make sure that your work is very good, and make sure you don't have these harmful expectations on yourself that could only lead to disappointment, right? You want this to be a joyful thing. And then sometimes you need to step back from that business mindedness. I know others need to hear the opposite, that you need to think in a more business-like way, but I know that there are some who could benefit from just being in the moment with their characters and with their story and really experiencing it, it will only improve your story. You might write a little bit more slowly if you're not, focused on that finish line of finishing it, editing it, publishing it. But I think all in all, both the story and yourself will be better off if you spend some time just living in the moment, like I said, with your characters in your story. All right, so let's bust some myths about getting through that muddy middle then, because I do want you to finish your story. I do want you to publish it. Please don't hear that that's not the case. I just want to make sure you have healthy expectations and realize that maybe your story won't be perfect and won't be published right away, but if you stick with it, you can become an author. You can make that your career, even if that's a goal. All right, so busting some myths. Okay, myth number 1, you have to write in order. Now, have I written books like this? Yes, I have. This one was written from beginning to end without jumping around at all. But I have written lots of other books totally out of order and then put it together and made it look like it was the plan all along. So Laertes, I jumped around quite a bit. There are a lot of flashback scenes, so it was easy to sort of put those in with Laertes' relationship with Hamlet, so you get a better idea of that. So what I'm saying is, if it's helpful for you, then write in order. Go ahead. But something that I think would be helpful for a lot of people stuck in that muddy middle is to skip to a chapter or a scene or a moment that you know is out there in the future and maybe excites you more than whatever the next scene is you feel you have to write. I'm going to give you permission to just write that scene. Go to the action scene. Go to the scene where they kiss. Go to the scene where there's that big reveal. Go to the heist. Go to the whatever it is. And you can always fill in the part between A and B later on. Okay, another myth is that you have to plot everything in advance. You do not. In fact, you can even surprise yourself with a cliffhanger. I've done this before. I have randomly thrown things in when I'm not quite sure where the story is going to go, and then I later figured out what was happening with that. So I've done that with, again, End of the Forest. So Zorofax, if you're wondering, is my spicy romantasy pen name. This is still me. So this one, since I Discovery wrote the whole thing, I would sometimes just throw things in that I thought were interesting, and then I'd kind of figure out what was going on there later. I did something similar with the final book of the Tanyuan Academy series. I did plot a lot of that, but there's a big battle set piece at the end of Kingdoms on Fire, book 3, where I didn't know every detail. And so I would end with some kind of surprise or failure pretty often, and then I would figure out what to do about that later. So surprise yourself with a cliffhanger. You might need to take a day off. There is a myth that you need to write every day. Some people do write every day, more power to them. But this is not something that needs to be a hard and fast rule. Like, you're not serious enough about your writing if you're not writing every day. I would challenge that. I would say, it's hard to call yourself a writer if you don't write at all. Then you're not a writer by definition. I think if you're going to be serious about an author career, you do need to prioritize writing. You need to prioritize the different elements of, an author business and learning and all of that. So making it a priority, important. Writing every day is something that works for some people and doesn't need to work for everyone. So you are allowed to take a day off from even thinking about your story. Maybe you need to step back. Maybe you need to do something unrelated. It's incredible how many ideas can come to mind when you just take the stress out of thinking about your story and you do something else. You go for a walk, you hang out with friends, you know, whatever it might be. So something totally unrelated. Speaking of totally unrelated, this is probably the most controversial opinion that I'm going to have in this video, and that is, it is a myth that you can't jump around to a new project. Now, there's a caveat to this. I am not promoting the shiny object syndrome. So if you're unfamiliar with that term, it's just when people look at the next idea and they just chase that. They figure the grass is greener over there, look at that shiny object over there, and they never actually finish anything because they're always chasing some new idea that seems more exciting than the one you're currently in. I do not advocate for that. This video is about making it through that muddy middle so you can finish a story that you're proud of. However, I think it can be helpful occasionally, and with the right person, to jump onto a different project. There are a few different reasons for this. For me, I have, you know, of course, my Tenured Academy series. It's young adult fantasy. It's dark. It has a big cast. It's complicated. Lots of moving pieces. So for me, that took a lot of brain power. I'm super proud of that series, but in between writing those, writing Laertes, all these more complicated and dark books, I would write these Hallmark style romances. They're very short. Just to kind of clear my head and show myself that I could write something, you know, simple and fast, and it just gave me a sense of accomplishment and was kind of a palate cleanser for me. I had already proven to myself that I could finish books, finish stories, so I had that going for me. But yeah, I would hop over if I was feeling like I just wanted something really light and festive. I'd write these. If I was ready to dive into something more complex and, you know, mind using, unlike the words I'm using for this, but then I would write the more complicated stuff. I pretty often have multiple projects going on at once. So as I was writing Power to Charm, cozy stories about a witch, a cottage, and unexpected friends, which is just a romance-free, frog and toad-esque cottagecore story, I was also writing really spicy romantasy about pirates. So it's okay to hop around based on your mood as long as you return to the project, to your projects to finish them. Another reason why you might want to hop to a new project is if you started this book years ago and maybe a lot has happened, maybe you're not in the same place as a person as you were before, maybe this is not the project that you need right now. Maybe this is not the project you need to muscle through that muddy middle to get to the end. Maybe you need a fresh start and to finish that project. I would give this some really honest thought before assuming, yes, I've got to jump to something else. But I know that that's been the case for me. I've gotten through the majority of a book before. I've written over half of it, and then I'm like, this is not quite what I want to be putting out there anymore. Maybe I'll return to it. Maybe I'll rework it to something that I feel more comfortable with. But yeah, you know, it's okay to have that happen as well. Okay, so now you get to the nitty-gritty. You have your project. You need to get through that muddy middle. So at one point or another, you do need to sit and write. Even if you're afraid you're going to write garbage. We've all written garbage from time to time, but you do actually need to sit and write. It doesn't have to be every day, but the butt in seat, hands on keyboard does need to happen at some point. So there are different ways to kind of get yourself there. Some people have if you're not feeling that motivated, some people have like a ritual where they'll get a cup of tea. Maybe they will light a specific scent of candle, and then they're in that better mindset, you know, with the playlist going. Sometimes for me, I have taken my laptop off-site, gone to a coffee shop, I've gone to a bar, and I've ordered something, and that tells my brain, now I'm committed, I have to sit here, and this is what I came here to do. So then I open the laptop and, I get 4 pages down or whatever it is. So, yes. Again, if you're unsure about what's going to happen in your story, maybe you're more of a discovery writer, like I am on that spectrum. I would say I'm further in the discovery writer side than the plotter side. Just figure out what's going to happen in the next scene or in the next major turning point, or figure out what's going to happen at the end. Something that's been extremely helpful for me to make forward progress is to use brackets to briefly describe what the next scene is going to be about. If I don't feel like writing that next scene, then I'll just leave the brackets, I'll go on to the next scene, and then at the end I'll search for all the brackets in my document, and if I need to write that scene, I'll do it. If I need to come up with that character name instead of a placeholder, I'll do it. But anything that's going to slow me down that I could just kind of make a note about, I'll put in brackets. I still do this with all of my projects, and it's really a wonderful method that I've found. So yeah, figure out what's going to happen, and that will set you up for writing the next time. Some more ideas about the content of your story. Make every scene count. It's okay if you follow your characters around to get to know them and such, but ultimately try to make every scene matter to the overall story. So the majority of stories have both an external change, that story arc, and an internal change, that character arc, right? So every scene, every chapter should contribute to one or both of those, I would argue. So either that overall story arc and or the character arc. Again, an arc is just essentially a change, how things start versus how things eventually finish. How can you move those changes forward? Maybe you need to reveal a new clue or aspect of your character's personality, maybe their deepest fears that they need to confront, or their relationships, or what have you. Make sure to push your main character to grow in whatever area they need to change. Confront what needs to be confronted in order for them to change. Those can be some of the very best and most meaningful scenes to both you and eventually your readers. If you're totally stuck, try some try-fail cycles. So that's just what it sounds like. There's a goal that your character or characters want, right? Have them try to achieve that major goal, or maybe a side quest on the way to that goal, and have them fail and have to try again. They need new skills, they need new allies, they need new information in order to actually make that work. This try-fail cycle idea was very helpful as I was writing Kingdoms on Fire, which I mentioned earlier, during that big battle, infiltration of the castle that happens at the end of the story. I would have people try and I'd have people fail over and over again until, of course, eventually something works. As you're looking at your story, if that doesn't seem to fit, if you just are truly stuck, something that has also helped me is figuring out approximately where you are in the plot. So look up a beat sheet or a plot structure and see, okay, so let's take the hero's journey, for example. Not every story is going to fit the hero's journey, but you can maybe say, okay, so I've introduced my character, I've had the call to adventure, they've resisted the call, they've finally accepted the call, they've gone over the threshold into kind of a new world or new experience, they've met some allies. Okay, so what needs to happen next? And you realize, oh, okay, so there needs to be like a very dark point, like the dark point of the soul where everything is going wrong. How can I maybe come up with a scene that brings the character to that place? What I'm not saying is that these plot structures or beat sheets should be completely prescriptive for, like, it has to be this kind of scene that comes next, but it can really fuel a productive idea for the direction of the story that's going to feel satisfying for both you and the reader, and it can potentially show you where you've gone wrong and where you can redirect in a more fruitful way. A few more practical ideas for what to do when you're feeling kind of stuck in the middle. Raise the stakes. The stakes do not need to be raised to a world-ending level. This is something that franchises will often do, and it's like, no, we don't need to go to space, Fast and Furious. I mean, they know what they are as a franchise, but not everybody needs to reach those world-ending stakes. Instead, you can raise the stakes by showing how another character will be affected should the main character fail. It's not that they need to, like, die if they fail or something. It can even be an emotional stake. Like, maybe that relationship will end or be damaged if the main character can't accomplish their goal. So think about different ways that characters can be affected. This can be emotionally, this can be mentally, this can be physically. Society could be affected. Like, there are lots of ways that you could raise the stakes without bringing it to cartoonish heights. I mean, certain books, they need those cartoonish heights, and that's perfectly fine. But not all the time. You can raise the stakes in all these small increments that just make the story matter to the reader more. Something else that you can do that is often overlooked by newer writers especially is to flow between action and reaction. For the majority of stories, it is going to be that flow of action scenes, and then you need reaction scenes to show us why those action scenes mattered. What's the fallout of that? What is the character thinking? Those reaction scenes, assuming that they don't go on and on and on, are not going to slow the story down so much as making it matter more. So the next time we get an action scene, we are on the side of those characters even more than we were for the last one. There are exceptions to this, like there are exceptions to everything. Some literary stories are going to have more of that reaction, that thoughtfulness. Thrillers, I keep mentioning thrillers, but they're going to have more of those action scenes and less of those reaction scenes. But for the majority of stories, that flow between action and reaction is a really healthy way to continue your story. So if you've had your character in their head for a long time, it's time for some action. If it's just been non-stop car chases and battles and whatever, give a quieter moment. And just that contrast is going to keep the momentum going and keep the audience interested in what's happening. And this is kind of a newer idea, the final one on this slide anyway. It's a newer idea to me. It can be intimidating if you're writing your first novel and you're 30, 50 pages in and you're looking at how the shortest number of words that technically counts as a novel in most cases is 50,000, and how that's 200 pages. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's so much. Reaching there just seems like this impossible task. Instead of reaching for the end, reach for the midpoint. The midpoint is shorter to get to, and the midpoint is a really important, exciting moment all on its own. So I wanted to talk briefly about a midpoint and what it is. A midpoint is a big scene. It's going to be a moment of truth. It will confront a central lie. It'll help the character understand something important about the central conflict. It should feel electric, and the story usually changes from there. Since the moment is climactic, it's a defining moment before the final one at the end. Again, there are exceptions to everything, but almost every story will have, at the 50% mark, a scene just like this. So think about your favorite book, think about your favorite movie, go to that 50% mark, and I can almost guarantee that you are stumbling upon one of the best scenes in the book, in the movie. So some examples of that midpoint scene, it's when the T-Rex gets out in Jurassic Park. Obviously completely changes the game. In Tangled, it's when Rapunzel and Flynn get trapped in a cave and they think they're about to die together. And, you know, truths are revealed about both of them as they have the conversation right after they're trapped there. Lizzie rejects Mr. Darcy's first proposal in Pride and Prejudice. What a turning point that is. Everything, of course, begins to change after that. In the movie Titanic, halfway through that long film, the ship hits the iceberg. So we have a lot of setup. We're getting to know the characters, they're getting to know each other, and then the final half is the ship sinking. And then in A New Hope, Star Wars A New Hope, the OG, Luke saves Leia halfway through. So the midpoint is huge. It's exciting. You shouldn't have to slog through the middle because the middle of a story is awesome. It's fascinating. It's the meat of the story itself. So if you are reaching for that big turning point scene in the middle of your story, I think everything's going to feel a lot more manageable as you write scene by scene, sentence by sentence, and you just chip away toward that midpoint. At this point, some things that you can do to just keep all of this top of mind is to keep a record of, you know, creative writing notes, YouTuber channels like this one, TikTokers that could be useful, podcasts that have helped you. All of these are helpful resources when you feel stuck or unmotivated. You need places to go to motivate you, to give you those tips. Please subscribe if you're not subscribed yet to this channel. Here's a list of podcasts that I've found useful for different things. Most of these are geared toward indie authors like myself, but a lot of the advice applies to traditionally published authors as well. Here are some books that I've read that have inspired me or given me practical advice for writing more joyfully, figuring out how to write better character arcs, and figure out those scenes that are going to be meaningful. YouTube channels that have been useful for me in the past. I'm not as up on the latest helpful YouTube channels in the fiction writing space as I used to be, but these are still going and they are good. So I leave you with this final thought, that writing life is a series of highs and lows, but the highs are absolutely worth it. You can do it. You can get through that muddy middle. You can reach Oregon at the end of the Oregon Trail. And I believe that you can do this as long as you prioritize your writing and you're open to learning and trying new things. If something in this video doesn't work for you, try something else. I trust that something here will help you make progress and eventually reach that ending and have something that you're proud to show to others. Okay, that is it for today. Make sure to subscribe, like I said. Like this video if you like it. If there's some other way that you've gotten through that muddy middle portion that I didn't mention in this video, please put it down in the comments below along with any questions. My website, carly-stevens.com, has lots of extra resources as well for writers. So yeah, check that out. Whew. And until next week, see you later. Bye.